My mother's voice was dripping with that fake, syrupy concern she always used when she was about to move in for the kill. "Dora, honey, we know you're upset. We all loved Barnaby. But you're being a little dramatic, don't you think?" My sister, Chloe, nodded in agreement, her face a perfect mask of practiced sympathy. "It was just a dog, Dora. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." I stared at them, the two people who were supposed to be my family, standing in my living room and telling me how to grieve the loss of my best friend. My fiancé, Liam, squeezed my hand under the table, a silent signal of support. He'd been quiet, just watching them. And it was his whisper, hours later, that shattered everything. "They're not sad, Dora. They're nervous." Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. To understand why my family thought they could get away with it, you have to understand the role I've played my entire life. I was the responsible one, the fixer, the designated driver at the family demolition derby. From the time I was a teenager, I was the one who managed the fallout from their endless series of bad decisions. When my dad decided to invest his retirement fund in a friend's guaranteed emu farm and inevitably lost it all, I was the one who co-signed the loan to keep their house from foreclosure. My credit score took a nosedive, but as my mother said, that's what family is for, right? When my sister, Chloe, the perpetual golden child, dropped out of her third university program because the vibe was off, it was my apartment she crashed in for 6 months, rent-free, while she found herself. She found herself by ordering expensive takeout on my credit card and using my car to go on dates with guys who were, to put it mildly, not future CEOs. I was the family's built-in safety net, a human-shaped shock absorber designed to cushion them from the consequences of their own choices. They called it being the strong one, but what it really meant was that my needs, my feelings, my life were always secondary to their latest crisis. They had conditioned me to believe that my value was directly tied to how much I could sacrifice for them. Saying no wasn't just a refusal, it was a betrayal. Setting a boundary was seen as an act of aggression. For years, I went along with it, telling myself it was just easier to keep the peace. It's a classic case of boiling a frog. You don't realize the water is scalding until you're already cooked. My relationship with Liam was the first thing that was truly mine, and they hated it. Not openly, of course. They were masters of the passive-aggressive jab, the backhanded compliment. "Liam is so stable," my mother would say, with a tone that implied he was as exciting as a bowl of oatmeal. What she meant was, he's not a mess we can manipulate. Liam saw it from day one. He'd watch my phone light up with a call from my mum or Chloe, and he'd see the tension in my shoulders, the way my smile would tighten. He never pushed, but he would ask gentle questions. "Do you feel like they listen to you, or do they just wait for their turn to talk? Or, does it seem fair that you're always the one bailing them out?" These questions were little seeds of doubt planted in the barren soil of my ingrained obligations. They were terrifying and liberating all at once. He was the first person to validate my feelings, to tell me that it wasn't normal for a family to operate like a parasitic organism with me as the host. He was my anchor in the storm of their making, and they knew he was a threat to their comfortable, one-sided ecosystem. They just didn't realize how much of a threat until Barnaby. Barnaby was my dog, but that feels like too simple a word. He was a scruffy, one-eared rescue mutt with a heart of pure gold. I found him, or maybe he found me, during a particularly low point. Chloe had just borrowed, and subsequently crashed my car. My parents had guilted me into funding another one of my dad's can't-miss business schemes, and I was feeling like less of a person, and more of a walking, talking ATM. I went to the local shelter just to look, a classic lie we tell ourselves. And there he was, a trembling ball of matted fur in the back of a cage, with one ear flopped down and the other standing straight up, a permanent expression of quizzical surprise. The shelter said he'd been found on the side of the road, skinny and scared. Nobody wanted him. They said he was too shy. But when I sat on the floor, he crept over and put his head in my lap, and that was it. He was mine. He was the first thing I had ever chosen for myself that didn't have to be approved or validated by my family. He was a pure, uncomplicated source of joy. He didn't want my money or my car. He just wanted my affection and the occasional piece of cheese. For 5 years, he was my shadow, my confidant, my furry, four-legged soulmate. He was there for me through job changes, a nasty bout of the flu, and countless tearful phone calls with my mother, where I was once again cast as the villain for not being supportive enough of their latest manufactured drama. Liam understood. He loved Barnaby almost as much as I did, and more importantly, he understood what Barnaby represented. My first real step toward an independent life. My family, however, saw him as an inconvenience. He shed so much, my mother would complain, picking invisible hairs off her designer coat. "Are you sure it's a good idea to let him on the furniture?" Chloe would ask, with a look of disgust. They never offered to walk him, never brought him a treat, never showed him an ounce of the affection he so freely gave. To them, he was just another weird, inconvenient part of my life that they had to tolerate to get to the good stuff: my time, my money, and my unwavering attention. His presence was a quiet rebellion, a daily declaration that my life was, in fact, mine. And in their world of transactional relationships, a creature that offered unconditional love without asking for anything in return was an anomaly they simply couldn't comprehend. They didn't see a companion, they saw a rival for my resources. The breaking point, the moment the quiet, simmering conflict escalated into a full-blown war, came about 3 months before Barnaby died. It started, as it always did, with a crisis of their own making. My father, a man whose business acumen was rivaled only by that of a particularly optimistic lemming, had decided to sink the last of their savings into cryptocurrency based on a tip from his barber. The predictable crash happened, and suddenly they were facing another foreclosure. This time, however, the numbers were bigger. It wasn't a small loan to tide them over, it was a massive sum that would have required me to liquidate my own retirement savings and take out a second mortgage on the small house Liam and I had just bought together. The call came on a Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, with Barnaby snoozing on my feet. Liam was on the couch, reading. It was peaceful. Then my phone rang, and the peace shattered. My mother's voice was a high-pitched wail of manufactured panic. She explained the situation in a torrent of blame-shifting and guilt. It was the fault of the volatile market, the bad advice, the universe, itself everyone but my father. The monologue ended with the inevitable tearful plea. "We need your help, Dora. You're the only one who can save us. We're family." I felt that old, familiar pull, the ingrained reflex to jump in and fix it. I looked at Liam, and he just raised an eyebrow, a silent question. He didn't tell me what to do, he just held my gaze, giving me the space to make my own choice. And for the first time in my life, a different voice, a quiet but firm one, spoke up in my head. It said, "No." It was terrifying. I took a deep breath. "Mom, I can't," I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. "I can't drain my entire life's savings. Liam and I have our own future to think about." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. It was as if I had suddenly started speaking in a different language. Then came the explosion. "Your future," she shrieked, the victimhood replaced by pure rage. "What about our future? The future of the family that raised you, that gave you everything? I can't believe how selfish you've become since you met him. He's turned you against us." Chloe got on the line, her voice dripping with faux disappointment. "I always knew you'd choose him over us, Dora. Dad is heartbroken. You're tearing this family apart. They threw everything at me, accusations of betrayal, selfishness, cruelty. They said I was spitting on my father's dignity, that I was no daughter of theirs. The call ended with my mother sobbing that they'd be homeless, and it would be all my fault." I hung up, shaking, my heart pounding. Barnaby nudged his head into my hand, whining softly, as if he could sense my distress. Liam came over and wrapped his arms around me. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "It was the hardest thing you've ever had to do, but it was the right thing." I wanted to believe him, but years of conditioning fought against it. The guilt was a physical weight, a sickness in my stomach. That guilt was the leverage they needed. In the weeks that followed, they launched a full-scale emotional assault. There were no more angry calls. Instead, it was a campaign of strategic misery. My mother would send me sad one-line texts about packing boxes. My father would leave voicemails, his voice thick with a performance of weary defeat, saying he understood, but that he was just so disappointed. Chloe posted old family photos on social media with captions like, "Remember when we were all happy together?" It was psychological warfare, designed to wear me down. The linchpin of their plan, however, was our upcoming vacation. Liam and I had been planning a 2-week trip to a quiet cabin in the mountains, a much-needed escape. It was our first real vacation together. My family knew about it, and they saw their opening. About a month after the Great Refusal, as I'd started calling it in my head, my mother called. Her tone was completely different. It was gentle, conciliatory, defeated. "Dora, honey," she began, "your father and I have been talking. We were harsh with you, and we're sorry. You have your own life, and we have to respect that. We'll figure something out. We always do." I was so desperate for a truce that I almost fell for it. She continued, "We know you and Liam are going away soon, and we were thinking, well, we know finding a sitter for Barnaby can be a hassle. We'd be happy to watch him for you. It would be our pleasure. A way for us to show that there are no hard feelings." The offer hung in the air, a Trojan horse disguised as an olive branch. My internal alarms were screaming. They had never once shown an interest in caring for Barnaby. But the guilt-ridden part of me, the part that had been running the show for 30 years, saw it as a chance for reconciliation. A way to prove that I wasn't the monster they'd painted me as. When I told Liam, his reaction was immediate and visceral. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice firm. "Dora, no, think about it. They've spent a month making you feel like the worst person on earth, and now they want to do you a favor? A favor that involves the one thing in the world you love most, besides me? It's a power play." We argued about it for days. I accused him of being cynical, of not wanting to give my family a chance. He told me I was being naive, that I was letting my desire for their approval cloud my judgment. "They're not capable of doing something for nothing," he warned. "There's always a price. Always." But they were relentless. My mother would talk about how much they missed seeing me, how watching Barnaby would be like having a piece of me with them. Chloe sent a text saying, "It would mean the world to Dad." They were laying it on so thick, and I was so tired of fighting. In the end, I made a fatal mistake. I gave in. I told Liam I was doing it, that it was my family and my dog, and this was my decision. I needed to give them one last chance to prove me wrong, and prove him wrong. The look on his face was a mixture of disappointment and fear. "Okay," he said quietly, "but if anything feels wrong, even for a second, we come home. Immediately. I don't care if we've only been gone for an hour. We come home." I agreed, confident it wouldn't come to that. It was the biggest miscalculation of my life. The day we left for our trip was filled with a sense of gnawing dread. I packed Barnaby's bag with painstaking care, his favourite squeaky hedgehog, his worn-out blanket that smelled like him, his special hypoallergenic food, and a long, detailed list of instructions. I wrote down the vet's number in big, bold letters, along with notes about his walk schedule, his funny little habit of chasing his tail before bed, and the fact that he was scared of thunderstorms. It felt like I was preparing for a military operation, not leaving my dog with his supposed grandparents. When my parents and Chloe arrived to pick him up, they were a caricature of doting affection. "Oh, look at the handsome boy," my mother cooed, patting his head with a stiff, unnatural motion. Barnaby, who was usually friendly with everyone, flattened his ears and stood half-hidden behind my legs. He knew. Animals always know. My father made a show of reading my instructions. "Got it, Chief. Operation Spoil the Grand Dog is a go." Chloe just scrolled through her phone, occasionally looking up to offer a tight, insincere smile. They clipped on his leash, and as they led him to the door, he looked back at me, his eyes wide with confusion and a betrayal I wouldn't understand until it was too late. I almost called it off right then. The urge to run over, scoop him up, and lock the door was so strong it made me dizzy. But then I saw Liam watching me from the living room, and my own stubborn pride took over. I needed to see this through. I needed to prove that a glimmer of decency existed in my family. As their car pulled away, I felt a profound sense of loss, a cold emptiness that had nothing to do with an empty house. "It'll be okay," I said, more to myself than to Liam. "It's just for 2 weeks." He didn't answer. He just came over and held my hand, his grip tight and steady, an anchor in the storm I had willingly sailed into. The first few days of our vacation were a bust. I couldn't relax. The mountain cabin was beautiful. The air was crisp and clean, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I called twice a day to check in. The conversations were always the same, brief, breezy, and maddeningly vague. "How is he?" I'd ask, my voice tight with anxiety. "Oh, he's just wonderful. Having the time of his life," my mother would chirp. "Your father took him for a long walk this morning. Can I talk to him?" I asked once, knowing how ridiculous it sounded. There was a pause. "Honey, he's a dog. He's busy. You know, being a dog. Don't worry so much. You're supposed to be on vacation. Enjoy yourself." Chloe would send me blurry photos of Barnaby lying on their floor, looking lethargic. The captions were always overly enthusiastic. "Best friends," "Gadia," or "He loves it here." But in every picture, his one good ear was down, and he looked miserable. Liam tried his best to distract me. We went on hikes, we cooked elaborate meals, we sat by the fire. But he could see I was just going through the motions. On the 5th day, I had a particularly unsettling call with my father. I asked him if Barnaby was eating okay, as he could be a picky eater in new environments. "Eating like a horse," my dad boomed, "cleaned his bowl every time." This was a lie. A small one, but a lie nonetheless. Barnaby had never, in his 5 years with me, cleaned his bowl in one sitting. He was a grazer. He'd eat a little, wander off, and come back later. It was such a specific, ingrained habit. My dad's casual lie sent a spike of pure ice through my veins. It wasn't a mistake, it was a fabrication. He hadn't been paying attention at all. He was just telling me what he thought I wanted to hear. "Liam," I said, my voice trembling after I hung up. He lied. My dad lied about how Barnaby is eating. Liam's face hardened. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been looking at the photos Chloe has been sending. Look at the timestamps. They're all taken within the same hour on the first day. Look at the lighting from the window. And in every single one, the water bowl in the background is bone dry." He was right. They weren't sending daily updates. They were sending a curated package of old photos to placate me. The manufactured cheerfulness, the vague answers, the blatant lie from my dad, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying thought. Something was very, very wrong. "We're going home," I said, the words a cold, hard knot in my throat. Now, we didn't even pack properly. We just threw everything into our bags, left the keys on the counter, and got in the car. The 10-hour drive was the longest of my life. I didn't speak. I just stared out the window, my mind racing through every possible worst-case scenario. Neglect? An accident they were trying to hide? Had he run away? Each possibility was more agonizing than the last. With every mile that passed, the icy dread in my stomach grew, a premonition of the devastation that awaited us. I was no longer hoping to be proven wrong about my family. I was praying that the reality wasn't as bad as my darkest fears. We pulled up to my parents' house just after midnight. All the lights were off, which was strange. My parents went to bed early, but Chloe was a night owl. The house was silent, a dark, looming shape against the night sky. Liam parked on the street, and we walked up the driveway. I had my own key, and I let us in, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the lock. The moment I opened the door, I was hit by the smell. It was an acrid, chemical stench, the overpowering scent of bleach and industrial-strength air freshener. It was the smell of a cover-up. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silent house. No answer. No sound of Barnaby's claws clicking on the hardwood floor. No welcoming bark. There was just the smell and the cold, oppressive silence. Liam put a hand on my back, a silent, steadying presence. We moved through the downstairs, flipping on lights. Everything was unnaturally tidy, sterile. The living room rug was damp in one spot. The dog bed I had sent with them was gone. His water bowl, his food bowl, his favourite squeaky hedgehoggle vanished. It was as if Barnaby had never been there at all. Panic, raw and sharp, began to claw at my throat. I ran to the back door and looked out into the yard. Nothing. I checked every room, my calls of Barnaby becoming more frantic, more desperate. He was gone. As I stood in the middle of the living room, my world tilting on its axis, I saw a flicker of movement upstairs. A light had switched on and then quickly off again. They were home. They had been hiding, waiting, listening. "They're here," I whispered to Liam, my voice hollow. "They're upstairs." Liam's expression was grim. He simply nodded. We stood at the bottom of the stairs, and I called out, my voice now shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "Mom? Dad? Chloe? Where is my dog?" There was a long, heavy silence, and then the slow creak of a bedroom door. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, cinching her robe. She had the audacity to look annoyed. "Dora, what on earth are you doing here? You scared me half to death." My father and Chloe appeared behind her, their faces pale and drawn in the dim hallway light. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Where is Barnaby?" My mother descended the stairs slowly, her face arranged into a mask of sorrow. It was a performance, and a bad one at that. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice catching with fake emotion. "There was an accident." That was the moment the floor gave way beneath me. They stood there, a united front of feigned tragedy, and spun their story. It was a masterpiece of plausible deniability, honed by a lifetime of shirking responsibility. "It was so sudden," my father said, shaking his head. "He got out into the yard yesterday morning. We think he must have eaten something poisonous, some mushroom or plant. By the time we realized he was sick, it was too late." Chloe, the golden child, added her part, her voice a soft, sympathetic murmur. "We rushed him to the emergency vet, Dora. We did everything we could. They tried so hard, but he was just gone." My mother reached out to touch my arm, and I flinched back as if from a hot iron. "We didn't want to ruin your vacation," she said, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. "We were going to tell you when you got back. We didn't want you to worry." The story was seamless, rehearsed. And as they spoke, they watched me, not with sadness or empathy, but with a clinical, predatory focus. They were gauging my reaction, ready to manage my emotions, to steer my grief in a direction that was convenient for them. This was the scene that replayed in my living room the next day. After a night of hollow, empty shock, I had insisted they come to my house. I needed to be on my own territory, and that's when they started in on me. When my shock gave way to waves of gut-wrenching sobs, their sympathy evaporated, replaced by impatience. My raw, unfiltered grief was an inconvenience, an accusation. "You're being too emotional," my mother said, that line a cold slap in the face. "We're hurting too, you know." But they weren't hurting. And as I sat there, drowning in sorrow, Liam's quiet observation from later that day began to take root. "They're nervous, not sad." He was right. There was no grief in their eyes. There was fear. There was anxiety. Their shoulders were tense, their movements jerky. They weren't mourning a loss. They were managing a crisis. They were worried about their story holding up. After they left my house, leaving behind a trail of empty platitudes, Liam held me as I cried. But then he started asking questions. "Which vet did they take him to?" he asked gently. I didn't know. They hadn't said. Where are his things? His bed, his collar, his favorite toy. Even if he died, why would they throw those things away so quickly? I didn't have an answer. And that smell in their house, Dora, that wasn't just cleaner. That was bleach. A lot of it. Why would you need to bleach a rug if a dog got sick in the yard? The questions hung in the air, cold and sharp. The mystery wasn't just that Barnaby was dead. The mystery was why their story felt like a lie from beginning to end. The vindication they expected for their selfless act of dog-sitting was curdling into something ugly and dangerous. My grief began to morph, twisting into a cold, hard knot of suspicion. The narrative they had so carefully constructed was starting to fray at the edges, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to pull on the threads until the entire rotten tapestry unraveled. The investigation began with a single phone call. Fueled by a cold fury that had replaced my grief, I started calling every 24-hour emergency vet clinic within a 50-mile radius of my parents' house. I described Barnaby as scruffy, one-eared terrier mix and gave my parents' names, my name, Chloe's name. The answer was the same every single time. "No, Mum, We have no record of a dog matching that description being brought in yesterday. Are you sure? I would press, my voice tight. Maybe under John or Mary Smith? Or Chloe Smith? I've checked all variations, ma'am. No record. I'm very sorry for your loss. With each call, the foundation of their story crumbled a little more. Liam sat beside me, a grim-faced research assistant, looking up clinic numbers and crossing them off a list. After the 15th call, I hung up the phone and stared at him, my eyes wide with the horror of the implication. They hadn't taken him to a vet, they hadn't tried to save him. The entire story of a frantic, middle-of-the-night rush to an animal hospital was a complete fabrication. The next step was harder. It required me to think like them, to descend into their particular brand of selfish, lazy logic. If they hadn't taken him to a vet, what had they done? The answer felt like swallowing broken glass. They would have chosen the easiest, cheapest, and most discreet option available. Liam, ever the pragmatist, opened his laptop. If an animal dies at home, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard, what are the options? Home burial or a pet cremation service? Home burial seemed unlikely. My parents cherished their manicured lawn, the one they paid a service a fortune to maintain. They wouldn't have dared dig up the pristine sod. That left cremation. Liam's search brought up a list of local pet cremation services. There were only a few. One was attached to a large, reputable veterinary hospital. The others were smaller, independent operations, the kind of places that advertised discreet home pickup. My blood ran cold. I knew, with sickening certainty, which type of service my family would have chosen. I started calling the independent services. On the third try, I hit a wall of fire. I gave my name and described Barnaby. I'm calling about a one-eared terrier mix, likely brought in yesterday. The woman on the other end of the line cut me off. Her voice was cold. We were instructed that all communication was to go through the primary client, Chloe Smith. We cannot release any information to you. My heart stopped. It was them. Chloe was the point of contact. Please, I begged, my voice cracking. I'm his owner. There are some discrepancies in what I was told. I just need to know what happened. There was a pause. The woman sighed, a sound of professional weariness. Look, I can't give you details, but I can confirm we did a home pickup at that address yesterday morning. For a deceased animal. Yesterday morning. The words slammed into me. They had claimed he got sick and died yesterday afternoon, but the cremation service had picked up his body in the morning. He had been dead long before they even claimed he'd fallen ill. The timeline was a lie. Everything was a lie. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that would reveal not just the lie but the motive, was waiting in the most mundane of places, the kitchen trash. While I had been on the phone, a dark thought had occurred to Liam. The bleach, the cover-up. He had slipped out, telling me he was getting us some food, but instead he had driven to my parents' house. It was trash day. Their bins were already on the curb. He had opened the lid of the recycling bin, and right on top, nestled amongst junk mail and empty wine bottles, was the box. He brought it back and placed it on our coffee table without a word. It was a small, unassuming cardboard box for a product called Quiet Night, an over-the-counter sleep aid, a human sleep aid. The label had a long list of warnings, but one stood out in bold red letters. Fatal to dogs. Contains lilazine. Xylazine, a sedative, a tranquilizer. It was used in veterinary medicine, but in the wrong dose calculated for a human, not a 30-pound Dodgett, was a poison. It would cause a catastrophic drop in heart rate and blood pressure, leading to a quiet, seemingly peaceful death. A death that could, to the untrained eye, look like he had simply passed away in his sleep. Inside the box, one of the 2 blister packs was empty. I stared at the box, at the stark warning, and the full, monstrous reality crashed down on me. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't neglect. It was an execution. They had been angry I'd cut off their financial supply line. They saw Barnaby not as a living creature, but as the symbol of my independence, the rival for the affection and resources that they believed were theirs by right. So they had eliminated him. They had punished me in the cruelest, most sadistic way imaginable. They had murdered my dog to prove a point, that they could still hurt me, that they could still control me, that they could take away the things I loved. The grief I had felt before was a shadow compared to the towering, incandescent rage that consumed me now. It was a pure, righteous fury that burned away every last shred of doubt, every lingering scrap of familial obligation. I looked at Liam, my face a mask of stone. "I'm calling the police," I said, "and then I'm going to destroy them." The confrontation was not a screaming match. It was colder than that. It was a quiet, deliberate demolition. I called my parents and Chloe and told them to come to my house immediately. I said I had something for them from the vet's office. The lie was bait, and they took it hook, line, and sinker, no doubt assuming it was a sympathy card or some other mundane artifact of their fabricated story. When they walked in, I was sitting on the couch with Liam by my side. The quiet night box and the printed receipt from the cremation service, which Liam had managed to get the service to email him after explaining the situation, were sitting on the coffee table. They saw the items, and for the first time, I saw genuine, unadulterated panic in their eyes. The masks of sympathy and parental concern dissolved, replaced by the stark, ugly face of guilt. "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice a reedy whisper. I didn't answer her. I started talking, my voice low and steady, devoid of the emotion they so desperately wanted to label as dramatic. I laid it all out like a prosecutor's opening statement. I told them I had called every vet in the state. I told them about my conversation with the cremation service. I recounted the correct timeline that Barnaby had been dead and picked up for disposal before they had even called me with their tale of woe. I picked up the empty box of sedatives. "This must have been for his upset stomach," I said, my voice dripping with the sarcasm they had taught me so well. "Strange medicine for a dog you rushed to the vet, isn't it?" Chloe, the golden child who had always been able to lie her way out of anything, began to crumble first. "Dora, it's not what you think," she stammered, her eyes darting between me and our parents, looking for a script that didn't exist. "It was an accident. We just wanted him to calm down, he was so anxious." My father tried to bluster his way through it, falling back on his default setting of indignation. "How dare you accuse us? After all we did. We were trying to help." But it was my mother's reaction that was the most telling. She didn't deny it, she justified it. Her fear morphed into a twisted, self-righteous anger. "Maybe if you hadn't been so selfish, this wouldn't have happened," she hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You left us with no choice. You abandoned your family for that man and that animal. We were desperate. You have no idea what it's like to be so desperate." And there it was. The confession. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a punishment, a calculated act of vengeance for my refusal to continue being their personal bank. They had killed a part of my soul to teach me a lesson about loyalty. The rage I had been holding in check finally broke free, but it wasn't wild, it was focused. "Desperate?" I said, standing up. "You don't know what desperation is. You are not victims, you are monsters. You are cruel, empty people who are so rotten on the inside that you'd kill an innocent animal to get back at your own daughter for not setting herself on fire to keep you warm." I pointed to the door. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. You will never speak to me again. You will never see me again. You are no longer my family. As far as I am concerned, you died with my dog." They stared at me, shocked into silence. They had expected tears and hysterics, an emotional outburst they could manipulate. They did not expect this cold, final judgment. They had created a victim for 30 years, and they had no idea how to deal with a survivor. As they shuffled toward the door, stunned and defeated, I delivered the final blow. "By the way," I said, holding up my phone, "I've sent a full account of this, including the receipts and a recording of this conversation, to the police department's Animal Cruelty Division. I don't know if they can build a case, but they seemed very interested in your story. Have a good life." The slam of my front door behind them was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a cage opening, the sound of freedom. The fallout was both immediate and prolonged. The police did investigate, and while the district attorney ultimately decided there wasn't enough physical evidence to secure a conviction for animal cruelty proving intent, without a direct confession on tape, was nearly impossible, the investigation itself sent shockwaves through their lives. They had to hire a lawyer. They were questioned repeatedly. Their carefully constructed image as a respectable, normal family was shattered. The shame was a consequence in itself, a public stain they couldn't wipe away. But the real consequence was the one I had decreed. I was gone. I changed my phone number. I blocked them on all social media. I sent a short, clear email to every extended family member, aunts, uncles, cousins, explaining exactly what had happened and why I would no longer be attending family functions. I told them that any attempt to mediate or act as a messenger for my former family would result in them being cut off as well. The line was drawn, absolute and non-negotiable. At first, they tried to fight it. There were letters, filled with a bizarre mix of self-pity and blame. They never once apologized for what they did, only for how I felt about it. "We are sorry you chose to interpret our actions this way," one letter from my mother read. It was a masterclass in non-apology, the final, pathetic gasp of a lifelong gaslighter. When the letters went unanswered, they sent the flying monkeys. My aunt called, telling me I was tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. A cousin I barely knew messaged me, saying my parents were devastated and that I needed to be the bigger person and forgive. I held firm. To each one, I said the same thing. They murdered my dog as an act of punishment. There is no misunderstanding. There is no forgiveness for that. If you contact me on their behalf again, we are done. Retreated, shocked into silence by the blunt, ugly truth. My life, without them in it, began to change. It was like living with a constant low-grade fever for 30 years and then suddenly waking up healthy. The daily anxiety, the dread of the next phone call, the heavy weight of their expectations all just vanished. The silence they left behind was not empty. It was peaceful. Liam and I grieved for Barnaby, a pure and honest grief, unburdened by their toxic presence. We framed his one good photo, the one where he's mid-pounce in a pile of autumn leaves, his one ear flopped and his eyes sparkling with joy. It hurt to look at it, but it was a clean pain, a pain born of love, not betrayal. Without the constant financial drain of my family, we were suddenly more stable. We took the money we would have spent bailing them out of their next manufactured crisis, and we put it toward our future. We started a garden. We adopted 2 new rescues from the same shelter where I found Barnaby, a pair of bonded sisters who had been overlooked because they were too timid. Watching them blossom in our quiet, stable home was a form of therapy. The news of my former family came to me in snippets, through the grapevine of the few relatives who respected my boundary. Their lives, without their safety net, predictably unraveled. They lost the house. My father had to take a job as a greeter at a big box store, a humbling blow to his fragile ego. Chloe, forced to support herself for the first time in her life, was working 2 minimum-wage jobs and complaining constantly about how unfair it all was. They had built their entire existence on the foundation of my compliance, and when I removed it, the whole rotten structure collapsed. I felt no satisfaction in their misery, but I felt no pity either. I just felt nothing. They were strangers now, the villains in a story from a life I no longer lived. My new life is quiet, and it is my own. It is filled with the love of a good man, the warmth of 2 happy dogs, and the profound, unshakable peace that comes from choosing yourself. The ghost of Barnaby is still with me, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of the price of freedom and the fierce, unconditional love he taught me. He was the catalyst, the quiet bomb that, in his tragic death, gave me back my life. It was a horrific price to pay, but one I honor by living the life he made possible. So, I leave it to you. Did I go too far in cutting them off completely and ensuring their lives fell apart, or did I not go far enough? Let me know in the comments.